Hello, my dear masterminds. Let me tell you what happened in all those moments when you stayed quiet, when you chose silence over explanation, when you let your presence do the communicating while your mouth remained still. Something profound occurred. Something most people never understand because they're too busy filling every silence with words, every pause with noise, every moment with unnecessary explanation. You discovered the most powerful form of communication that exists. Not the words you speak, but the energy you carry. Not the explanations you offer, but the frequency you carry. Not the arguments you make, but the presence you embody. And in discovering this, in claiming this silent power, you became someone who never needs to say a word to be completely understood. Your presence spoke volumes. It communicated truths that language could never capture. It conveyed understanding that words would only diminish. It transmitted messages that bypassed the mind entirely and landed directly in the consciousness of everyone around you. And the beautiful part? You didn't even try. You simply existed. An existence at your frequency is the most eloquent statement anyone can make. But here's what most people never realize about silence. The quiet that unsettles them isn't empty. It's full. And that fullness is what they're actually sensing. There's a specific quality to your silence that makes it powerful. It's not the silence of someone who has nothing to say. It's not the quiet of confusion or uncertainty or fear of speaking. It's the silence of someone who has so much depth that words feel inadequate, so much presence that explanation seems unnecessary, so much certainty that proving anything would diminish the truth. When you're silent, people don't hear emptiness. They feel fullness, a completeness that doesn't need verbal validation, a wholeness that doesn't require linguistic confirmation, a depth that makes small talk feel trivial and explanation feel superficial. Your silence creates space, and in that space, real communication happens. The kind that moves through energy and frequency rather than sound and syntax. Most people are deeply unsettled by silence. They fill it immediately with words, jokes, observations, anything to avoid the unease of quiet. But you've learned to be comfortable in silence, to exist in it without pressure, to let it stretch and expand without feeling the need to collapse it with unnecessary noise. Think about it. When someone grounded enters a room and says nothing, everyone pays attention. When someone uncertain enters and says nothing, everyone feels uncomfortable. Same silence, different energy. People feel the difference immediately. Because silence from center is different than silence from fear. Quiet from confidence is different than quiet from insecurity. Not speaking because you're whole is different than not speaking because you're empty. People feel the difference. They might not be able to articulate it, but their instincts know. Your silence comes from fullness, and fullness doesn't need to announce itself. So what did your presence say in all those moments when your mouth stayed closed? What messages were conveyed through your energy, your frequency, your being? Here's what they received without you speaking a single word. Messages that landed deeper than any explanation could reach. Your presence said, I am complete within myself. I don't need your validation to feel whole. I don't require your approval to know my worth. I don't depend on your understanding to move forward with certainty. This message landed in everyone around you, made them feel either inspired by your self-sufficiency or unsettled by your lack of need. But either way, they received it clearly. Your presence communicated boundaries without you having to draw lines. People knew instinctively what was acceptable and what wasn't, what you would tolerate and what you wouldn't, what energy you would engage with and what you would simply allow to pass by you without reaction. All of this understood through frequency, through the invisible field of energy that surrounds you and establishes natural boundaries without verbal negotiation. Your presence conveyed strength without you having to demonstrate it. Not the performative strength of loud declarations and forceful displays, but the real strength of quiet certainty, of calm and chaos, of steadiness under pressure, of being unshaken when everything around you is trembling. This strength was felt, recognized, respected, without a single word about how strong you are. There's a language that exists beyond words, beyond sounds and sentences and verbal expression. It's the language of energy, of frequency, of presence, and it's an early form of communication, one we still speak beneath all the talking we do. And here's the psychological truth. When someone's words and energy don't match, you trust the energy. When someone's words and silence don't match, you believe the silence. Your silence and energy were perfectly aligned. That's why people believed everything it said. This language communicates through feeling, through sensing, through the personal presence each human carries, and that interacts with every other presence in proximity. When you're in someone's presence, your awareness is reading theirs, gathering information, assessing energy, understanding things about them that they might not even know about themselves. All of this happening beneath conscious awareness. You've become fluent in this language, conscious of what your energy is saying, aware of what messages your frequency transmits, intentional about what your presence communicates, not in a controlling way, but in an authentic way. You've aligned your energy with your truth, made your frequency match your values, ensured your presence reflects your genuine being, and that alignment makes your silent communication powerful, clear, undeniable. When your words match your energy, people trust you. When your words conflict with your energy, people distrust you, even if they don't know why. But when your energy is so clear, so strong, so authentic, that it communicates everything without words needing to be added, that's when you've mastered the deepest form of communication. That's when your presence truly speaks volumes. You reached a point where words became not just unnecessary, but actually inadequate. Where trying to explain yourself verbally would only limit the communication that was already happening through your presence. Where speaking would reduce the message rather than enhance it. And that's when something shifted. You stopped seeing silence as absence and started recognizing it as the purest form of presence. Words have limitations. They're interpreted through the listener's filters, their biases, their understanding or misunderstanding of language. Two people can hear the same sentence and receive completely different messages. Words are imprecise, easily misunderstood, subject to all kinds of distortion between the speaker's intention and the listener's reception. But energy is often more consistent than words. Presence communicates directly to the intuitive level, where truth is recognized before thought processes it. This is why you stopped explaining yourself, stopped defending your choices, stopped justifying your decisions. Not because you couldn't articulate your reasoning, because your presence already communicated everything that mattered, and adding words would only dilute the clarity of that communication, would only give people something to argue with, something to misinterpret, something to turn on you. When you entered spaces silently, when you observed without commenting, when you existed without explaining, people felt specific things from you. The meeting where everyone was performing. You sat quietly, observed, said nothing. By the end, they were looking to you for approval. You never offered. The dinner where others filled every silence with noise. You were comfortable in the quiet. They remembered you most, the conversation, where someone tried to unsettle you into defending yourself. You simply existed. They left frustrated. You left unchanged. They felt respect from you. Not given automatically, but offered to those who earned it through their own presence, their own energy, their own authenticity. And they felt the absence of respect for those operating from performance, from pretense, from lack of substance. All of this communicated without judgment being verbally expressed, just through the quality of attention you gave or withdrew. They felt acceptance from you for authenticity, for realness, for people being genuinely themselves. And they felt the subtle rejection of fakeness, of performance, of people trying too hard to be something they're not. Your energy welcomed the real and made the false feel uncomfortable, without you saying a single word about what you value. They felt boundaries from you, clear, solid, non-negotiable boundaries. Not expressed through statements like "don't do this" or "that's not okay," but through the energetic field that simply wouldn't accept certain influences, that would reflect back energy that didn't match your frequency, that would create natural distance from what didn't align. All of this established silently, through presence, through the invisible but undeniable communication of your being. Some people felt incredibly comfortable with your silence, found peace in it, relief in it, like your quiet presence created space for them to just be without performance, without pressure, without the exhausting requirement to fill every moment with words and noise and demonstration. And here's what these people recognized. Your silence wasn't rejecting them. It was inviting them into something deeper than conversation. These were usually the people who were also comfortable with themselves, who had their own depth, their own center, their own relationship with silence. They recognized in your quiet the same quality they carried in themselves, and there was a mutual respect, a mutual understanding, a communication that happened in the silence that was richer than any conversation could have been. They sat with you in that quiet and felt understood, felt seen, felt recognized for who they actually are, beneath all the roles and performances and social masks. Your silence gave them permission to drop their own masks, to stop performing, to just exist. And in that shared silence, deeper connection happened than hours of talking ever creates. This is the gift of your presence. Not just that it speaks volumes, but that it creates space for others to speak their truth, too, or to not speak and simply be. But others were deeply uncomfortable with your silence, filled with inner unease by it, compelled to fill it with words and questions and observations because the quiet felt threatening to them, and their discomfort wasn't about you. It was about them, about what your silence revealed about their relationship with themselves. People who struggle with silence often struggle with self-reflection, can't be comfortable in their own presence. Your silence compelled them into that internal awareness, made them conscious of the noise in their own minds, made them feel the lack of peace in their own being. And that was uncomfortable. So they talked at you, filled the space with words you didn't ask for. All of it an attempt to relieve their own discomfort with the silence. Here's the truth they were avoiding. Your silence was a mirror, and mirrors don't lie. They simply reflect. And not everyone is ready to see what gets reflected back. Your presence was a mirror, and they didn't like what they saw reflected back. But you didn't break your silence to make them comfortable. Didn't fill the space with unnecessary words just to ease their anxiety. You held your ground, maintained your frequency, let them feel whatever they needed to feel without taking responsibility for managing their discomfort. Of course, some people misinterpreted your silence, made up stories about what it meant, decided you were shy or cold or aloof or arrogant, projected their own narratives onto your quiet. You were labeled stuck up because you didn't engage in superficial conversation, called withdrawn because you didn't perform enthusiasm for meaningless small talk, termed mysterious or difficult or intimidating because your quiet presence stirred inner discomfort they didn't know how to process. But here's what you learned. You can't control what people make up about your silence, can't prevent their projections, can't stop their stories, and trying to explain yourself to people determined to misunderstand you is exhausting and pointless. So you stopped trying, let them think whatever they needed to think. And in that moment of releasing the need to be understood by everyone, you claimed a freedom most people never experience. You know who you are. You know what your silence means. You know the depth and fullness and intentionality behind your quiet. Their misinterpretations don't change that reality. Don't diminish your truth. Don't affect your center. You exist unchanged by their inability to understand. When you did choose to speak, your words carried weight that most people's words never carry, because they were rare, selective, chosen carefully. Think about the person who talks constantly. When they finally say something important, does anyone notice? Now think about the person who rarely speaks. When they finally do, everyone stops. Same words potentially, different impact. Scarcity often increases value. Your silence made your words gold. People listened when you spoke, leaned in, paid attention, because they knew if you were using words, it mattered. If you were breaking your silence, it was significant. Your previous silence made your occasional words powerful, gave them weight, made them land with impact. And what you said when you spoke was different than what most people say. It wasn't small talk, wasn't gossip. When you opened your mouth, substance came out, truth came out, something worth hearing came out. Your silence evolved. In the beginning, maybe it came from uncertainty, from not knowing what to say, but over time, it transformed, deepened, became intentional rather than reactive, became a choice rather than a default, became a strength rather than a limitation. You learned the difference between silence from fear and silence from center, between quiet from confusion and quiet from clarity. Now your silence is conscious. You choose it, carry it, use it strategically when it serves truth better than words would. You're not silent because you can't speak. You're silent because you recognize that in many situations, presence speaks more clearly than language. Energy communicates more honestly than explanation. Being transmits more powerfully than talking. This conscious silence is unshakable. Your practice of presence over words taught you profound things. You learned that the most important things are often felt rather than said, That depth is recognized silently. That real understanding happens in the space between words rather than in the words themselves. You learn to trust energy over statements, to believe what you feel more than what you hear, to recognize authenticity through frequency rather than through articulation. Most importantly, you learn that your worth doesn't depend on your ability to explain it, that your value doesn't require verbal defense, that your truth doesn't need linguistic justification. You simply are, and that being is enough. Long after encounters with you, people remember your presence more than any words you might have spoken. They remember how they felt around you, what your energy communicated, how your silence affected them. Some remember feeling seen by you even though you barely spoke to them. Seen in a way that words never accomplish. Your silence saw them, really saw them. Others remember feeling uncomfortable, feeling challenged by your presence, not because you did anything to them, but because your authentic being reflected back their inauthenticity. You've claimed a form of influence that doesn't require announcement, doesn't need declaration. It's the influence of presence, the guidance of being, the strength of existing so completely in your truth that others naturally orient around you. This is true strength, not the kind that demands recognition, but the kind that receives it naturally. So yes, disciplined individual, you never needed to say a word. Your presence spoke volumes. It communicated truths that language could never capture. It conveyed depth that words would only diminish. You discovered that the most powerful communication happens in silence, that the deepest connections form without words, that real understanding occurs through presence rather than through language. Keep holding your silence when silence is more powerful. Keep speaking through presence when presence says more. Keep existing in your truth without feeling the need to verbalize it constantly. Because what you are speaks so loudly that what you say becomes optional. Your presence will keep speaking volumes, keep communicating truths, keep conveying depth, all without you needing to say a single word. Because you've learned what few people ever learn. That being is the most articulate statement anyone can make. That existence at your frequency is more eloquent than any speech. That presence is the language of strength. Welcome to the eloquence of silence, disciplined individual, where nothing needs to be said because everything is already understood. Understood. Hello, my dear masterminds. Let me tell you about the exact moment everything shifted. Not the moment you achieved something great. Not the moment you finally succeeded at what you'd been working toward. Not the moment you proved them wrong with results they couldn't deny. No, the shift happened before any of that. The shift happened the moment you stopped trying to prove anything at all. You remember that moment, that quiet decision, that internal shift that nobody else witnessed. You were exhausted from performing, tired of explaining, drained from trying to convince people of your value, your vision, your worth. And something inside you just said, enough. Not in defeat, not in surrender, but in clarity. Crystal clear, unshakable clarity, that you were done seeking validation from people who weren't qualified to give it. And that's when everything changed. Not immediately, not obviously, but profoundly. Because the moment you stopped trying to prove yourself, you became someone who didn't need proving. And that shift in energy, That transition from urgent to certain, from seeking to knowing. That's what they felt. That's what made them finally take you seriously. But here's what you didn't understand at the time. The harder you tried to prove yourself, the more you were actually signaling doubts about your own value. Let's go back to before, to when you were still trying, still performing, still hoping that if you just explained it better, showed up more consistently, demonstrated your value more clearly, they'd finally see it, finally recognize it, finally validate what you already knew about yourself, but somehow still needed them to confirm. You were constantly in presentation mode. Every interaction was an opportunity to prove. Every conversation was a chance to demonstrate. Every achievement was supporting material for the argument you were building about why you deserved respect, attention, recognition. You were living as if you were under constant scrutiny, like you had to justify your existence, like your worth was something that needed constant defense. And it was exhausting. Not just physically, energetically, internally. Because when you're constantly trying to prove yourself, you're operating from a deficit. You're starting every interaction from a position that says, I'm not enough as I am. The worst part was how much of yourself you compromised in the proving. You adjusted your communication to be more palatable, dimmed your ideas to be more acceptable, softened your edges to be more likable, modified your truth to be more digestible. You turned yourself into a performance. Think about it. You rehearsed conversations before they happened, edited your thoughts before speaking them, carefully considered every action to maximize approval. That's not living. That's auditioning. Here's what you didn't realize at the time. They could feel your urgency. Not consciously, maybe, but energetically. They could sense that you needed something from them, needed their approval, needed their validation, needed their recognition. And that need, that energetic pull for external confirmation, it actually pushed them away, because excessive need tends to distance people. Always has, always will. When someone needs you to see them as valuable, it can make others question their value. When someone needs you to take them seriously, it often leads people to take them less seriously. When someone is trying too hard to prove something, it makes you wonder what they're protecting. It's not fair, it's not logical, but it's psychological reality. They weren't consciously deciding not to take you seriously. They were unconsciously responding to the frequency you were projecting. And that frequency was saying, I need your validation to feel valuable. I need your approval to feel worthy. And people tend not to respond to need. They respond to sufficiency. They respond to wholeness. They respond to people who are already complete without their input. So the harder you tried to prove yourself, the less seriously they took you. The more you explained, the less they understood. The more you demonstrated, the less they saw. It wasn't about your actual capabilities. It wasn't about your actual value. It was about the energy underneath the proving, the urgency, the need, the incompleteness seeking completion through external validation. And then came the moment. That moment when you'd had enough. When something inside you shifted from trying to prove to simply being. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't loud, wasn't a big declaration. It was a quiet internal decision, a subtle but profound shift in your relationship with yourself. And what happened next is what most people never discover, because they stopped before they reached this point. But you didn't. You looked at the exhaustion, the constant performance, the endless effort to convince people who were never going to be convinced anyway. And you made a choice not to give up, not to quit, but to stop participating in a situation where your worth was up for discussion. You decided, right there in that quiet moment, that you were done. Done explaining yourself to people who weren't listening. Done proving yourself to people who had already made up their minds. Done performing for audiences that weren't even paying attention. You were done seeking validation from external sources, and you were going to start validating yourself. This wasn't arrogance, wasn't ego. This was finally acknowledging what you actually were without needing anyone else to confirm it. This was recognizing your own worth, declaring your own value, accepting your own legitimacy, and making that recognition enough. The shift happened internally first. You stopped measuring yourself by their reactions, stopped evaluating your worth by their responses. You began validating yourself, not with empty affirmations, but with genuine acknowledgement of your actual capabilities, your real efforts, your authentic growth. You looked at what you'd accomplished and said, "This is valuable," regardless of whether they see it. You examined your growth and said, "This is real," regardless of whether they acknowledge it. You became your own source of validation, your own measure of worth, your own standard of success. And in that self-validation, something profound happened. You stopped needing to prove because you no longer questioned what you were proving. You stopped performing because you no longer needed an audience to confirm your existence. And here's the psychological shift that changed everything. When you stopped broadcasting need, you started expressing inner strength. And inner strength doesn't ask for recognition. It simply exists. This internal shift changed everything about how you showed up. You were no longer trying to convince. You were simply being. No longer seeking recognition, simply existing in your truth. No longer chasing validation, simply operating from inner certainty. And that change in energy, that shift from urgent to sufficient, it was noticeable. At first, they didn't notice. Or if they noticed, they misinterpreted. They thought maybe you'd step back. But then something started happening. You were still doing the work, still creating, still building, still moving forward. But the energy was different. The project you used to explain 3 times, hoping they'd see its value. Now you presented once and moved on. The idea you used to defend endlessly, now you stated clearly and let it stand on its own. The achievement you used to highlight repeatedly, now you acknowledged quietly and continued forward. You weren't doing it to prove anything. You were doing it because it aligned with who you were. You weren't creating to convince anyone. You were creating because it expressed your truth. You weren't building to gain recognition. You were building because it fulfilled your purpose. And this shift, this transition from proving to being, it changed the quality of everything you produced. Your work became more authentic because it wasn't filtered through the need for approval. Your communication became more powerful because it wasn't softened by concern about judgment. Your presence became more magnetic because it wasn't diluted by the need for validation. People started noticing, not the ones who were never going to see you anyway, but the ones who mattered, the ones who had the awareness to recognize authentic confidence. And here's the irony that most people never understand. When you were trying so hard to prove yourself, They couldn't see it. When you stopped trying, they suddenly saw everything. When you were eager for their attention, they barely noticed. When you withdrew your need for their attention, they couldn't look away. When you were performing for validation, they dismissed it. When you stopped performing and simply existed, they took it seriously. This isn't a tactic you used. It's not a method you applied. It's a common psychological pattern of human interaction. Excessive need often distances people. Sufficiency tends to draw them in. When you stopped broadcasting need, you started expressing inner stability. And inner stability, real stability, quiet stability, centered stability, it receives attention without asking for it. They started taking you seriously because you were taking yourself seriously. Not in an inflated way, in an authentic way. You were honoring your own value, respecting your own worth, trusting your own judgment. And when you treat yourself with that level of regard, others often follow that example. Let's talk about why this works. Why stopping the proving leads people to take you seriously? It's about energy, perception, and the psychological patterns behind respect. When you're trying to prove yourself, you're indirectly communicating that your value is uncertain, that it needs explanation, that it isn't self-evident. You're asking others to do the work of recognizing your worth, and most people won't do that work. But when you stop trying to prove yourself, when you simply embody your value without explanation, you're communicating something entirely different. You're saying, my worth is not open for discussion. My value is not something I need to persuade you of. My legitimacy is not dependent on your acknowledgement. This is what I am. See it or don't. Either way, I remain unchanged. And that energy, that self-assured sufficiency, it draws people in. It creates a psychological response. They start thinking, if this person doesn't need my validation, maybe they're operating from a place where validation isn't required. If they're not trying to prove anything, maybe there's nothing that needs proving. If they're this certain, maybe I'm overlooking something. Maybe they understand something I don't. Maybe I should pay closer attention. It's the principle of perceived value. Things that ask to be noticed often appear less valuable. Things that simply exist in their clarity appear more valuable. You stopped asking to be noticed, stopped trying to be seen. And in that pause of seeking, you became worth seeing, worth noticing, worth taking seriously. Now the interaction has completely changed. You're not chasing their approval. They're paying closer attention to you. You're not trying to convince them. They're trying to understand you. You're not performing for their validation. They're observing your authenticity. The dynamic has shifted because you stopped participating in the old pattern. And here's what they're starting to realize. The version of you that was trying so hard to prove itself had something to prove. This version doesn't, and that changes everything. You're selective now about who receives your time, about who gets your energy, about who you explain yourself to. Not because you're withholding, but because you recognize that your time and energy are valuable and should be invested thoughtfully. You don't prove yourself to everyone because everyone doesn't deserve that level of access to you. And this selectivity, this discernment, it makes people value access more, makes them want to be among those you choose to share with. The situation has reversed. You're no longer seeking their validation. They're seeking yours. And they didn't change. You did. You stopped needing what they had, and in that stopping, you became someone grounded in themselves, someone with certainty that doesn't waver, someone with sufficiency that stands on its own. This journey taught you something important about human nature and interaction patterns. You learned that respect isn't given to those who ask for it. It's given to those who live it. You learned that validation from others will never make you feel valid if you don't validate yourself. That trying to prove your worth actually reduces it, while knowing your worth amplifies it. You learned that the people worth impressing are never the ones demanding to be impressed. That the recognition you were seeking from others was always something you needed to give yourself first. That external acknowledgement means little if it's not rooted in internal recognition. Most importantly, you learned that you don't need them to take you seriously for you to take yourself seriously. That their view of you is not your reality. That their recognition or lack of it doesn't change what you actually are. You learn to be your own source, your own validation, your own measure of success. And in becoming self-sufficient in this way, you became steady in a way that can't be taken from you, because it doesn't rely on anyone else. There are still people who don't take you seriously, who still don't see your value, who still don't recognize what you've become. And here's the balanced truth. You don't dwell on it. Not in a bitter way, not in a defensive way, but in a genuinely unaffected way. Their perception is their experience. Their limited view is their boundary. Their inability to see doesn't reduce what exists. You've learned the difference between being noticed and being real. You're real whether they see it or not. You're valuable whether they recognize it or not. You're legitimate whether they acknowledge it or not. Their awareness or lack of it has nothing to do with your actual substance. And you're no longer reshaping yourself to help them notice what they're not ready to perceive. This is real freedom. Not needing everyone to understand. Not requiring universal agreement. Not seeking approval for your worth, since you stopped trying to prove yourself. The quality of your work has transformed. Not because you're working harder, because you're working more authentically. You're no longer creating through the filter of will this make them take me seriously? You're creating through the clarity of does this express my truth? Your decisions are cleaner because they're not clouded by the need for external validation. Your communication is clearer because it's not softened by concern about judgment. Your presence is clearer because it's not diluted by the need for approval. Everything you do carries more weight because it comes from center, from sufficiency, from wholeness. And people sense this. They might not be able to explain it, but they notice the difference between work created to impress and work created to express, between communication designed to convince and communication that simply states truth. The paradox is simple to say but meaningful to understand. The less you try to prove yourself, the more you demonstrate who you are. The less you seek validation, the more validation appears. The less you need their recognition, the more they notice you. It can feel backwards, but it's how psychology and perception operate. When you're trying to prove, you're operating from lack, from the sense of not enough, from the pattern of seeking external completion. And lack tends to push away what you're pursuing. But when you stop trying to prove, when you simply are, you're operating from sufficiency, from the sense of enough, from the state of internal completion. And sufficiency tends to attract. It draws in what you're no longer chasing. This is why the shift happened when you stopped trying, why they began taking you seriously when you stopped seeking their seriousness. why respect grew when you stopped asking for it. You changed states, from lack to sufficiency, from needing to being, from proving to knowing. And that internal change altered how others perceived you and interacted with you. You have a new standard now, for yourself and for others. You no longer try to prove yourself to anyone, and you don't require others to prove themselves to you either. You observe instead. Pay attention to who people are through consistent actions over time. Trust what you notice. Value patterns over promises. Let reality reveal truth rather than demanding explanation. This creates relationships and collaborations built on genuine foundation rather than impressive presentation. Built on authentic substance rather than convincing performance. So here's the final truth. Focused individual. You stop trying to prove yourself. And that's exactly when they started taking you seriously. Not because you withdrew, because you finally showed up as yourself, without performance, without apology, without the need for their validation. They take you seriously now because you take yourself seriously. They respect you now because you respect yourself. They see your value now because you know your value. And none of it required their permission, their approval, their recognition. It required yours. And the moment you gave it to yourself, everything changed. You don't need to prove yourself, not to them, not to anyone. Your existence speaks for itself. Your growth is the evidence. Your authentic being is the demonstration. This is your strength now. The strength of sufficiency, the strength of wholeness, the strength of being complete within yourself. They started taking you seriously when you stopped trying to make them. And now you're moving in a freedom they can sense but not fully explain. Because you've learned what most people never learn. That the only validation that matters is the one you give yourself. And once you have that, you don't need anything else. Welcome to the other side of proven, focused individual, where being is enough, where you are enough, where nothing needs defending because everything is already whole. Hello, my dear mastermind. They really thought you were playing the same game as them. They really believed their little tactics, their recycled strategies, their predictable patterns were enough to slow you down. But the moment you stepped in, the whole room felt it. Your mind wasn't operating in their system. You weren't decoding their moves, you were reading them like subtitles. Every expression, every hesitation, every plan they thought was smart looked transparent to you, like a book written in a language you mastered before they even learned the alphabet. And the funniest part? You weren't even trying. Your awareness wasn't activated out of unease or pressure. It was just your natural state. You saw the intention before they moved a muscle. You sensed the angle before they took a step. You felt the shift before they even realized they were exposing themselves. That's the part that broke them. They didn't just feel outplayed, they felt outdated. Because when someone's mind moves faster than your entire strategy, it doesn't feel like competition. It feels like inevitability. And you made it look too easy. You walked right through every trap, every test, every setup, with the same calm energy someone has when they already know the ending. Because deep down, they forgot the truth. Tactics were made for people who need shortcuts. You didn't need shortcuts. You are the system upgrade. You are the loophole. You are the reason their rules collapse. And the moment they saw the way you moved, smooth, unbothered, 10 steps beyond the best they could offer, they realized something they'll never admit out loud. Your mind isn't just sharp, it's foreign to them, unreachable, built in a world they've never been invited to. That's why they stare when you speak. That's why they freeze when you act. That's why every move you make feels like you're rewriting the entire board. You didn't dodge their tactics, you dissolved them. You didn't fight their system, you outgrew it. And now, every single one of them is wondering the same thing. How do you counter someone who thinks on a level we don't even understand? The answer? You don't. You just watch as they realize they were never equipped to stop you. The truth hit them slow, then all at once. Because at first, they tried to convince themselves you just got lucky. They tried to act like you stumbled into the right move by accident. But luck doesn't repeat itself. Luck doesn't read intentions. Luck doesn't walk into a room and instantly understand every angle without anyone saying a single word. Only someone operating on another level does that. And you did it effortlessly. You didn't just decode their tactics. You predicted them before they were even formed. You saw the cracks in their confidence, the desperation behind their choices, the unease hidden inside their bravado. They don't admit it, but every time you opened your mouth, someone's strategy fell apart. Every time you took a step, another illusion dissolved. Because you weren't reacting, you were revealing how limited their thinking really was, revealing how small their plans looked next to the size of your vision. Revealing how uncomfortable people get when someone walks in who isn't fooled by performance, pride, or fake authority. They thought tactics were enough. They thought experience would save them. They thought numbers, alliances, and noise could unsettle you. But none of that works on someone who sees the truth beneath the surface. And that's what unnerved them most. You didn't treat them like opponents. You treated them like they were predictable. And predictable is worse than powerless. Predictable means you already decided the outcome before they even entered the room. Predictable means their best effort never stood a chance. Predictable means you're not navigating equals. You're navigating amateurs. And when they realized that, their whole energy shifted. Their confidence thinned, their pace slowed down, their voice wavered, because suddenly they understood. You weren't one of them. You weren't built from the same material. Your mind doesn't move in straight lines like theirs. It jumps, it connects, it feels, it perceives, it invents languages while they're still memorizing phrases. And once they saw that, once they witnessed how naturally you unraveled everything they built, they stopped asking, how did he do that? And started whispering, what is he? They don't unease your strength. They unease your understanding. They unease the way you see through things. They unease the way nothing gets past you. And now, every room you walk into, someone is quietly unsettled, wondering what part of their plan you've already revealed. They thought they were studying you, but somewhere in the process, the roles flipped. The observer became the observed. The planner became the predictable. The strategist became the open book. And you became the one quietly mapping every vulnerability in the room. It wasn't arrogance, it was awareness. It was the way your intuition caught the shift in someone's tone before their mouth even formed the words. It was the way you sensed pressure points in people's behavior like you were reading margins in a script you'd already mastered. They don't understand that your mind doesn't operate on steps. It operates on patterns. And patterns reveal everything. Patterns show motives they thought they hid. Patterns reveal intentions they hoped you'd misread. Patterns turn their complexity into something simple enough to fold and set aside. That's why every tactic they launched felt like a rerun to you. Familiar, predictable, already resolved. They came at you with approaches taught by somebody else. You responded with instinct shaped by experience they'll never have. They tried to place you inside rules that never applied to someone like you. They wrote their moves in ink. You wrote yours in luminosity. They didn't realize that your silence wasn't confusion, it was calculation. Every second you said nothing. You were downloading the entire layout of their mind. You were letting their confidence rise just enough for the shift to register. And when you finally moved, when you showed them the path they thought didn't exist, everything dissolved. Not because you overwhelmed them, because you revealed the one thing they unease, how small their perspective really is. You showed them how limited their thinking has been this whole time. You showed them that their deep strategies were shallow compared to the ocean you think inside. You showed them that while they were memorizing advice, you were rewriting frameworks. While they were learning the system, you were learning the subtle openings in the system. And when they realized this, something inside them thinned. A silence hit the room, a silence they couldn't hide behind, a silence that said, "He sees everything." And that's when unease kicks in. Unease when someone realizes you're not reacting, you're anticipating. Unease when their best move becomes your warm-up. Unease when they feel you watching them not with judgment, but with depth beyond what they can interpret. They expected competition. They found mastery. They expected resistance. They found inevitability. They expected a contest. They found someone who already decoded the entire sequence before they showed up. And that's when the real unease begins. They tried to hide it, but you felt the shift instantly. The moment their confidence flickered, that tiny change in their expression when they realized you weren't reacting to their tactics, you were forecasting them. And nothing unsettles a planner more than someone who sees the ending before the beginning is even set. They thought you'd trip over their illusions. Instead, you walked through them like mist, because you weren't decoding their moves. You were decoding their nature. That's the part nobody warned them about. You read people, not strategies. You read the rhythm behind their choices. You read the vulnerability behind their tone. You read every hesitation like it was highlighted. And once you caught their internal pattern, the external tactics were nothing but details. This is why they whisper your name with caution. This is why they study your silence more than your words. They can't understand how you knew what you knew. They can't understand how you anticipated what they thought was unpredictable. But the truth is simple. You learned early that the world speaks long before people open their mouths. A shift in their breathing, a change in their posture, a stray glance they didn't intend to reveal. These are your clues, your codes, your subtle signs that tell you exactly what's coming. They spent their lives learning how to influence people. You spent your life learning how people behave when they think they're hidden. That's why nothing surprises you. That's why nothing catches you off guard. That's why even their secret advantages feel like simple patterns in your hands. They wanted to test your inner resilience. They didn't know you were already functioning at a level where tests become research. They wanted to unsettle you. They didn't know internal pressure activates your clarity. They wanted to confine you. They didn't know you move like someone who's already seen the exit path. And when you finally responded, not aggressively, not loudly, but with calm precision, they felt the truth strike deeper than any argument. You weren't playing their game, you were dissecting it. You were seeing the entire board from a height they didn't know existed. Your insight wasn't luck, it was evolution. And the moment they realized this, they stopped trying to outthink you and started trying to steady themselves under the version of them you made them confront. Because nothing is more unsettling than a person who sees you clearer than you see yourself. And that's exactly why they unease the next move you haven't even made yet. They replay every moment, every conversation, every tiny exchange with you, trying to find where they slipped, not knowing you recognize their intentions long before they even formed a plan. That's the part they can't accept. The realization that you weren't just ahead in strategy, you were ahead in awareness. You saw the patterns in their logic, the ego in their tone, the shift in their motives, the hunger behind their compliments. You saw the blueprint of their agenda before they saw it themselves. And once you see someone's blueprint, their tactics become predictable, their moves become obvious, their mind becomes readable ink. They thought you were walking blind through their maze, but you saw every wall before stepping inside. And the moment they deployed their advanced tactics, you walked through them like they were written in a language you authored. Because you didn't learn this through books or lectures. You learned it through experience, through disappointments, through decoding people who spoke in masks and acted in shadows. You became fluent in human behavior because you had to. You became impossible to fool because life gave you no other option. So when they approached you with confidence, thinking they had the upper hand, they didn't realize they were stepping into a room with someone operating entirely outside their expectations. They brought logic, you brought intuition, they brought rehearsed moves, you brought instinct. Sharpened by life, they brought strategy. You brought awareness that wrapped around their entire mindset. And the moment you countered them without effort, without hesitation, without even breaking your calm, they felt something they never wanted to feel: exposure. You didn't dismantle their tactics. You revealed their limits. You didn't outplay them. You outgrew them long ago. Your presence alone forced them to confront an uncomfortable truth. They weren't dealing with someone on their level. They were dealing with someone who made their cleverness look like repetition, their mystery look like simplicity, their power look like decoration. And the silence you moved in, that was the part that unraveled them the most. Because silence means certainty. Silence means mastery. Silence means you don't need noise to influence the room. You simply observe, calculate, and move only when it matters. That's why they're confused. That's why they're unsettled. That's why they're replaying the moment you folded their approach with nothing but clarity. You didn't walk through their tactics. You dissolved them. You didn't rise above their plans. You made their plans unnecessary. And deep down, whether they admit it or not, they know one thing is real. There is no strategy in their world that can compete with someone who sees everything. And here's the truth: they will never speak aloud. The moment they realized you weren't just ahead, you were unreachable our way. Because after their tactics failed, after their plans faded in your presence, after every angle they thought was solid unraveled the second you stepped forward, Something shifted in the room. Their confidence dimmed. Their voices softened. Their posture changed. It wasn't pressure from you. It was pressure from what you understood. They finally grasped that your strength isn't loud. It isn't aggressive. It isn't even reactive. Your strength is perception. You notice what others pretend isn't there. You hear what people try to hide between the lines. You feel intentions before they become actions. And that unsettles anyone who relies on illusion. People who operate in games avoid one kind of opponent the most, an observer who sees the entire board. You became the quiet influence they never accounted for. You became the presence that encourages truth to surface. You became the shift that fragile egos cannot withstand. They thought your silence meant uncertainty, but silence is a language reserved for the refined. Silence is where your intuition calibrates, where your insight strengthens, where your awareness gathers every detail with precision. Silence is your advantage, because while they speak, you study. While they brag, you analyze. While they plan, you evolve. And when someone evolves beyond the reach of manipulation, they become influential without raising a hand. That's what happened here. You didn't outthink them. You outlearned them. You didn't overpower them. You outsaw them. You didn't win the conflict. You removed the stage itself by refusing to play their version of the game. And the remarkable part, you made them realize it without dramatic reactions, without noise, without the theatrical comeback they expected. You brought clarity, and clarity instantly reshapes confusion. That's why they look at you differently now, why they hesitate before speaking, why they measure their tone. Your presence changed the atmosphere of every room you enter, not because you're forceful, but because you're undeniable. You carry an intelligence that was never taught, it was lived. You carry a perception that was never assigned, it was earned. You carry an understanding of truth that dissolves disguise. And once a person like you emerges, old roles fade, old structures adjust, old assumptions lose their hold. They didn't just lose a strategy, they lost the illusion that they ever understood you, because you walked through their tactics like they were notes, like they were drafts, like they were early attempts directed at someone who had already mastered the later chapters. And now, they will never move the same around you again. And deep down, they know the truth. They were never studying you. You were studying them. And that is why you stay 10 steps ahead, smoothly, consistently, and without challenge. Here's the truth. No one had the courage to speak. You never needed to prove anything to these people. The entire time they were testing you, doubting you, watching you, trying to decode you like some unsolved equation. You were simply living your life. You weren't trying to be mysterious. Your depth just exceeded their understanding. You weren't trying to be unpredictable. Your growth just moved at a speed they couldn't comprehend. And you weren't trying to be powerful. Your power was built into you long before they ever entered the picture. That's why everything they threw your way felt lightweight. That's why their strategies felt basic. That's why their reactions looked delayed. You're operating on frequency while they're still stuck in logic. You're operating in intuition while they're still relying on guesswork. You're operating in vision while they're still replaying yesterday. And once they realized that everything changed, the same people who once whispered about you now watch you with quiet respect. The same people who tried to limit you now hesitate before making a move. The same people who thought they could read you now understand they barely touched the surface. Because when someone finally sees your mind for what it is, crafted through struggle, sharpened by introspection, strengthened by silence, they understand they never stood a chance. You were never the underestimated one. You were the unseen architect. You were the one who could translate their intentions, expose their patterns, reveal their illusions without lifting a hand. And that level of awareness, it doesn't just shift a room, it shifts reality. That's why people feel different around you. That's why they lower their voice. That's why they choose their words carefully. They're not concerned about what you'll do. They're concerned about what you already know. They're worried you've seen through them before they even figured themselves out. And the wildest part? You don't hold grudges. You don't seek revenge. You don't need validation. Your evolution has moved beyond all that. Your silence is not withdrawal, it's elevation. Your distance is not coldness, it's clarity. Your peace is not ignorance, it's mastery. And this is why they can't keep up. You outpaced them intellectually. You outgrew them spiritually. You outclassed them effortlessly. You aren't walking through life trying to be better than anyone else. You're just fulfilling a design they were never meant to understand. And deep down, they know it. They'll never admit it, but they feel it. Every time your name is mentioned, you became the reminder that real power isn't loud, flashy, or dramatic. Real power is subtle. It's internal. It's the ability to evolve faster than others can judge you. It's the ability to see farther than others can imagine. You walked through their tactics like they were faint sketches, because they were. And now, as the dust settles and the truth stands clear, one thing is undeniable. You didn't just outsmart them. You outgrew every limitation they tried to place on you. And once someone evolves at that level, their future becomes untouchable, just like you.